I do not understand a trend I observe over and over again in the climate change debate. Over and over again, the discussion focuses on whether the Earth's temperature is, in fact, increasing, whether human activity plays a part, and whether we have any responsibility to give up oil, coal, and natural gas to bring the Earth's temperature down. Now, I have my own opinion on this debate, but it confounds me that it keeps happening this way. As an adolescent, I found the evidence for global warming compelling, but I was still resistant, and it took me a while to understand why. It was because I saw the act of accepting it as a sacrifice. Accepting global warming means we are all going to have to stop driving cars and flying in planes. How in the world are we going to do that? It's not possible. It can't be done. It's too much sacrifice. Please allow me to stop entertaining this notion. Please allow me to have hope again. I was associating the acceptance of global warming with the rejection of industrial and technological living. I've never been Amish, and I have never felt particularly up to the Amish way of life. And I was associating the act of accepting the occurrence of human-caused climate change with doing everything without electricity, just like the Amish do. Look, either you can continue burning fossil fuels in your car, or you can learn to drive a horse-drawn carriage. Sure, the evidence for global warming might be pretty compelling, but the Amish lead a pretty rough life. First crisis. This is the one that tends to receive all the focus and so little of the understanding. Carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases steadily raise the temperature of the Earth to levels that can no longer sustain human civilization or life. Maybe we can give up oil and coal and try relying on nuclear power instead, but nuclear power has been an essential ingredient in Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and such. And even when it runs properly, it produces waste that remains radioactive for more than 400,000 years. Maybe we can rely on natural gas instead. But while it's true, this does not contribute to global warming as far as I know. This is still a non-renewable resource, which I will get into in just a moment. Second crisis. For a reason that continues to elude me, no one is discussing this, which is that oil, coal, and natural gas, as I mentioned previously, are all non-renewable resources. That means the more we use them, the more we use them up. Nuclear power, on the other hand, produces nuclear waste, which, as I mentioned previously, has its own environmental hazards. I don't know how I came to this state, and I don't remember quite how I found my way out of it, but here are a few pieces of information I have that no one seems especially inclined to share. First, with or without global warming, oil, coal, and natural gas are each non-renewable resources. Now, the word non-renewable has many syllables, and I can conceive of no other reason for the general public to have an aversion to this subject. What the word non-renewable means is that with or without whatever effects they may have on the environment, it is in our best economic interests to rely on ways to do without them, because the more we use them, the more we use them up. Let me emphasize this point, even about natural gas. No, it's true, it does not raise the temperature of the Earth, but its supply is limited. Why are we ignoring this? Why does this detail have this frustrating knack for getting overlooked? Oil is limited. No one's disputing that. Coal is limited. No one's disputing that. Natural gas is limited. Is someone disputing that? This means the more innovative we are at finding new sources for these, the more innovative we are at helping their supplies to disappear. The faster we approach the point when there will be no more oil, coal, or natural gas. Now I know, it's looking pretty bleak. You're picturing yourself having to ride around in a horse-drawn carriage, and this, fortunately, is a misconception. You see, if you want electricity in your home, there is plenty. You've heard of solar power, wind power, geothermal energy, and power from undersea currents. You've just been very quick to scoff at it and write it off as liberal propaganda. Now tell me, what makes it liberal? What would make an idea liberal or conservative? This is not a rhetorical question. I would like to know. Because as far as I can tell, a conservative source of energy is just a source of energy that can be monopolized, is destined to run out, or has other endemic environmental issues, while liberal sources of energy are sources of energy that have been stigmatized in some way, and so we hesitate to adopt them because we don't want to wear that stigma ourselves. Maybe you were thinking that solar could not possibly be practical because it's not always sunny. Wind could not be practical because the wind does not always blow. Geothermal could not possibly be practical because it depends on heat from underground sources, which are constantly cooling, and one day are going to be too cool to work. And power from undersea currents are as unreliable as power from wind energy. Well, first, you are right that geothermal sources of energy are one day going to be too cool to rely on, but that day is millions of years away, and it is going to arrive whether we rely on heat from those vents or not. By then, we are surely going to have developed innumerable alternatives. We might as well rely on them in the meantime. Second, generally, you are absolutely right that solar power, wind energy, and energy from undersea currents are each intermittent. It's a big word, but work with it a little, you can get it. This does not set them apart from oil, coal, natural gas, or nuclear power. I can tell you, as someone who has been a member of the crew of a nuclear submarine, there is a reason we build these things with batteries. Sometimes the reactor malfunctions and goes offline for repair, or has to be taken offline for maintenance. But when a nuclear submarine switches over to battery, it's a sudden transition that virtually no one outside the engine room notices. On the other hand, a solar power plant, wind farm, or undersea water current farm, making the transition to battery, is a much more gradual process. Now, if one can make the transition with no problem, it should not be that hard for the other two. And besides, whatever other drawbacks there may be with renewable sources of power, we are never going to have to worry about them running out. We are never going to reach a point where we are going to have to say, well, that's it. There's no more sunlight. There's no more wind. We used it all. But perhaps you are concerned about the turbines making noise. Well, I can tell you firsthand that this concern is misguided. I can tell you, as someone who has been to a wind farm and stood right at the base of one of those turbines, if the wind is blowing hard enough to make the turbine rotate, it is also blowing too hard for you to hear it. Ah, but maybe you're thinking about internal combustion engines. And I understand that too. Internal combustion engines, at first glance, provide a pleasant driving experience. But even if you set that aside, a lot of us need them for our means of survival. Most prominent among them, the people who drive tractor trailers. Well, renewable energy can cover that too. It's just that you've not heard of it because you are in the United States, or some other country where the fossil fuel monopoly has a stranglehold on the media. Yes, there are electric cars, but personally I'm not a big fan of them. From what I understand, they are horribly inefficient. You can drive from home to work without using gasoline, but you have to keep your car plugged in overnight, every night. Sure, it helps if you work for a company that is progressive enough to provide you with the option to keep the car plugged in there as well. But most employers don't provide that option yet. There are also hybrids, and I'm not clear what the deal is with them, but they still use gasoline. There are cars that burn corn ethanol, but this type of fuel is cultivated from corn, and when corn grows, it draws carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and when this type of fuel is burned, it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Technically, this makes this type of fuel renewable, but corn takes time to grow that is fairly non-negotiable. And corn is a type of food which can only grow on arable land. So getting too dependent on this cuts into the food supply and pushes up the price of it. There are cars that run on hydrogen fuel cells. This, of course, sounds pretty dangerous. After all, hydrogen is highly flammable. Think of the Zeppelin. But then gasoline is also highly flammable, though the waste product from hydrogen combustion is water. It is way too hot to drink at the time it is produced, but it's not toxic. The main problem, though, with hydrogen combustion as a fuel source is its inefficiency. I seem to recall that a compact car fitted to run on a hydrogen fuel cell needs to refuel every other day under the same circumstances in which the type of conventional compact car can make do with refueling every 5 days or so. I suppose if I had to, I could make do with one of these. But the type of car I'm really curious about is fitted to run on algae biofuel. It's exactly like corn ethanol, except more efficient. First, instead of being processed from corn, it is processed from algae. Algae does not require arable land or soil. It requires water and sunlight, which means anywhere one can build a greenhouse, one can cultivate algae. Now with algae, the more one has, the faster it grows. Take a supply of algae and grow it until you run out of room for it, and then take that supply and process it into biofuel. There are people with greenhouses in their basements who cultivate algae biofuel personally, who have their cars fitted to run on it, and use them to run all their personal errands. I'm only aware of one slight drawback with this in comparison with gasoline. Gasoline is slightly more efficient. That is, if you have two vehicles that are otherwise identical, but one is fitted to run on gasoline and the other is fitted to run on algae biofuel, and the two are used identically, and the first needs to be refueled every 5 days or so, then the second will probably need to be refueled every 4 days or so. Tractor trailers don't run on gasoline, though. They run on another oil derivative called diesel. The algae equivalent is called biodiesel. Now, I don't know as much about the two of these, but it's my understanding that their relationship is similar. And of course, this is all going to be a moot point when all the oil runs out and the renewable sources of energy are all we are left with. And let's not lose sight of the fact here that oil is running out. Coal is running out. Natural gas is sort of redeemed by the fact that it does not contribute to global warming, but even natural gas is running out. One can be sort of forgiven for being confused by the science of whether human activity is contributing to upward trending global temperatures, but on the limited supply of oil, coal, and natural gas, the science is beyond dispute. This does not mean that humanity is out of options, as you are well aware if you have been paying attention up to this point. It just means we need to get serious about developing them. Are you ready to drive a car that runs on algae biofuel instead of gasoline? Are you ready to keep your home lit and heated with electricity that comes from solar power, wind power, undersea currents, or geothermal energy instead of an oil plant, coal plant, or a nuclear plant? Are you ready to be hired to design or build the necessary infrastructure for one of these? Because yes, each of these is going to require an infrastructure. Does that pose a problem? If so, that's quite surprising, because building an infrastructure has never presented an insurmountable challenge for this country in the past. We built the farm infrastructure. We built the highway infrastructure. We built the rail infrastructure. We built the shipping infrastructure. We built the cargo infrastructure. We built the communications infrastructure. We built the telecommunications infrastructure. We built the military infrastructure. We built the space infrastructure. Building infrastructures has never in this country's history presented an insurmountable challenge, especially when it was necessary. Well, it's necessary now. And the longer we put it off, the more necessary and the harder it's going to get.